Good afternoon. This is my 20th trip to South Korea, and I'm very happy to be here to share it with you. I expect there will be many, many more in the near future. You know, folks, in business, in school, in the media, at this wonderful forum, you keep hearing about the importance of technology, of the latest high-tech delivery systems. You hear about the growing need for global content. But what none of us hear enough about is something that is just as essential: the need for a spirit of entrepreneurship, and most importantly, the need for passion in our work. Why did each of us choose to enter a very hard, very competitive business? Why are those of you who are still in school or just coming up through the ranks, why are you interested in industries that are so challenging and so difficult? Is this all about power and wealth and fame? Is that your objective, or is there something more? What happens when you discover your passion in life? Now, you're looking at someone who grew up as a comic book geek. I love comic books. Ever since I was little, I had a massive collection of comic books. By the time I graduated high school at age 18, I had over 30,000 comic books that filled my parents' garage. My father never once got his car into that garage. Instead, he built for me shelves around 3 walls of the garage, and I filled them with my comic books and then filled the bottom until the whole place was overloaded with them, some of them dating back to the year 1936. I was such a comic book geek that when I was a kid, I went to the very first Comic-Con ever held on the planet Earth. 200 of us showed up at the first Comic-Con in a worn-down, run-down hotel in downtown New York. There were 197 boys and 3 girls. Well, the people who were putting on this first Comic-Con said, "This is a dilemma for us. What are we going to do on Saturday night with 197 guys and 3 girls?" And they said, "Well, let's just tell everyone to come dressed as their favorite superhero, and we'll give out prizes." And it was that night in July 1964 in New York City where cosplay was born, where everybody got dressed up for the first time, and now it's grown and grown and grown. At New York Comic-Con last month, over 200,000 people showed up for Comic-Con. But I was there first. I loved my superheroes. I loved Batman more than any superhero. So what happens when you discover a passion in life and you can feel it coursing through your veins? You can feel it burning up inside of you. What do you do about that? What could I do? When I was 8 years old, I dreamed about one day writing Batman comics. Later, I dreamed about making dark and serious Batman movies and showing the whole world what the true Batman was: a creature of the night who stalked demented and psychologically disturbed villains from the shadows. But how could I get there from here? I'm a blue-collar kid from New Jersey in the United States. I didn't come from money. My dad was a stonemason. My mom was a bookkeeper. So I couldn't buy my way into Hollywood. I didn't have any relatives in Hollywood. I didn't know anybody in Hollywood. So how do you get there from here? How do you make the jump? How do you make your dreams come true? Well, my first opportunity came when I went to college. I went to Indiana University in the United States, and it was the 1970s, a time of great experimentation on American college campuses, and I can't say another thing about that. But in reaction to those times, Indiana started something new. It was called the Experimental Curriculum Department. And this was the idea. If you had a thought about a new course to teach in college that had never been taught before and could get the backing of one of the departments on campus, you then had the right to appear before a panel of deans and professors and pitch your course. If they approved it, you could teach it for 3 hours of credit, like any major course. I was just an undergrad. I was a junior in college. My hair was down to here. I was wearing a Spider-Man t-shirt that day when I took a pile of comic books and I went to the folklore department. And I said, comic book superheroes are our modern-day mythology. The ancient gods of Greece and Rome and Egypt all still exist, except today they wear spandex and capes. Now, if you don't believe me, well, the Greeks called him Poseidon, the Romans called him Neptune, I call him Aquaman. Some people called him Mercury, I call him the Flash. The head of the folklore department said, Michael, you're absolutely right. These are really the same stories of brave heroes battling the demons and dragons of their day. We'll back you. And so I went with my comic books in to see the dean and the professors. It was a long, dark conference room, big conference table. I came walking in, I thought I had just walked into the secret sanctum of the Justice League. And the dean at the end of the table looked at me, looked down at me. He had a little pair of half glasses right at the edge of his nose. And he said, so you're the fellow who wants to teach a course on comic books at my university? I knew I was in deep trouble. I then began the first pitch of my career. The dean let me talk for about 2 minutes and then cut me off. He said, Mr. Uslan, stop, come on. He goes, I read comic books when I was a kid. I read every issue of Superman I could ever get my hands on. But all comic books are, all superheroes are cheap entertainment for little children, nothing more, nothing less. I reject your theory. Now, at that moment, I could have bowed my head, picked up my comic books, and turned around and walked out. But in a moment that would prove to be life-changing for me, figuring I had nothing left to lose, I stood my ground and I said, Dean, may I ask you 2 questions? He said, ask me anything you want. I said, are you familiar with the story of Moses? And he folded his arms and stared at me. He said, yeah, so? I said, Dean, could you very briefly summarize for me the story of Moses? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, I don't know what game you're playing here, Mr. Uslan, but I'll play this with you. The Hebrew people were being persecuted. Their firstborn was being slain. So a Hebrew couple placed their infant son in a little wicker basket and sent him down the river Nile. There he was discovered by an Egyptian family who raised him as their own son. When he grew up and learned of his true heritage, he became a great hero to his people. I said, stop. Dean, thank you so much. You said before you read Superman comics when you were a kid. By any chance, do you remember the origin of Superman? He said, well, sure, the planet Krypton was about to blow up. A scientist and his wife placed their infant son in a little rocket ship. They send him to Earth. There he's discovered by the Kents, who raise him as their own son. And then he stops, stares at me for what I swear to you was an eternity, and said, your course is accredited. I am now the world's first college professor of comic books. I couldn't believe I pulled this off. Whoa. So I'm now walking back to my apartment off campus, and all of a sudden, I could hear the voice of my mother in my head. And it was a very familiar voice saying something she had told me over and over again. Michael, you can have the greatest creative ideas in the world, but if you don't market yourself, if you don't market them, no one will ever know. So when I got back to my apartment, once again figuring I have nothing to lose, I picked up the telephone and I called United Press International. Now, back then, UPI was as big a news syndicate as the Associated Press is globally today. A reporter picked up the phone, and I started to scream at the man. I said, "What's wrong with you? This is terrible. You're not doing your job. You're supposed to be the watchdogs of our society. This is outrageous." And he said, "Calm down, sir." He goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "What am I talking about? Are you kidding? I just heard that at Indiana University, they are teaching our children comic books. Now, are you telling me as a taxpayer in this state that they're using my money to teach our kids comic books? This has got to be some communist plot to subvert the youth of America." And I slammed down the phone. It took this reporter 3 days to find out, was there really a comic book course being taught at Indiana? And if so, who was the lunatic teaching it? So he came down, he found me, interviewed me. This interview with pictures went out. It was a third of a page long and was picked up by virtually every newspaper in North America, a bunch in Europe, and all over the world, and my telephone started to ring. I never taught one class where the room wasn't filled with TV cameras and reporters. NBC Nightly News, the CBS Evening News. I had reporters one night that were there from a kids magazine and from Playboy magazine. This was appealing to everybody. And I was invited on radio talk shows and then television talk shows. About 2 weeks later, my telephone rings. And it's this exuberant male voice. "Hi, is this Michael Uslan?" "Yeah." "Hiya, Mike. This is Stan Lee from Marvel Comics in New York City." I call this my burning bush moment. I was talking to my God. Oh, for those of you uninitiated, Stan is the co-creator of the entire pantheon of Marvel superheroes. Spider-Man, X-Men, Avengers, Thor, Hulk, you name it. Stan said, "Mike, everywhere I look, I'm reading about you in newspapers. I'm listening to you on the radio. What you're doing is great for the entire comic book industry. How can I help you?" And for me, that would begin a lifelong association with Stan Lee as a friend, as a mentor, and as a creative partner. Oh my God, comic book geek moment. 2 hours later, my phone rings again. It's a dour, quiet male voice. "Mr. Uslan, my name is Saul Harrison. I am Vice President of DC Comics in New York City. We publish Wonder Woman, Superman." I go, "Yeah, I'm Batman, I know." He goes, "We've been reading about you in magazines. We've been watching you on television. We think you are a very innovative young man, and we would like to fly you to New York City and discuss ways we can work together." Okay. Next thing I know, I'm offered a job at DC Comics. I will work there during the summers as an intern, and then when I go back to school in Indiana, they will put me on retainer. Another great comic book geek moment for yours truly. I started working at DC Comics in the summer. I was there one evening. It was the end of the day, and from down the hall, I heard one of the editors of the comic book The Shadow. I don't know if any of you remember The Shadow. It was an Alec Baldwin movie about 20 years ago. great character who influenced the creation of Batman. So I run down to see what the screaming is about. I said, "Are you all right?" He goes, "No, I'm not all right. I have a shadow comic book script that is due tomorrow on deadline, but I have a big problem because I don't have a shadow script. I don't have a shadow story. I don't even have an idea for a shadow story." I said, "I have an idea for a shadow story." He said, "You do?" I didn't. But I recognized that a door had swung open a little bit, and I put my foot in that door. An opportunity. He said, "All right, come in, sit down. What's your idea for a shadow story?" You're going to love it. It's great. The wheels are turning. I said, well, all the shadow stories are set in the 1930s. And at that time at Niagara Falls, they were going over the falls in barrels and walking across on tightropes. I said, picture a shadow story at night with the shadow battling a bad guy on a tightrope over Niagara Falls with the searchlights going. He said, "Michael, that's a great cover, but what's the story about?" I said, "Well, I'm just getting to that. The story is about smuggling." He goes, "Well, what are they smuggling?" I said, "Well, they are smuggling drugs." He said, "But what's unique about it? What's different about it?" And I said, "Well, I was saving this for the last because this is really the best part. They were going over the falls in barrels back then. False bottom in the barrels. They're hiding the drugs in there. The barrels are going over the falls on the Canadian side, washing up onto the American side. That's how they're getting it through." He says, "That's creative. I like that. Can you have this script on my desk tomorrow at 6 p.m.? I said, "Not a problem." I was now a writer for DC Comics. I pulled an all-nighter. I got the script done and handed in. 2 weeks later, I'm walking down the halls of DC Comics, and who's coming toward me but one of the most famous editors in the history of comics, the man responsible for the Dark Batman and for Justice League. And he was a very gruff guy on the outside till you got to know him, and then he was kind of a marshmallow, but gruff. So I'm walking toward him, hair down on my shoulders, and he says, "Hey, kid, I read your shadow script." I said, "You did?" He goes, "Yeah. It didn't stink." I said, "Whoa, thank you so much. Oh, my God. That's terrific. Wow." And then he looked at me and said, "How would you like to take a shot at writing Batman?" This dream I had since I was 8 years old came true. I got to write Batman comics, and I'm still an undergrad at Indiana University. Well, my first comic book comes out. I get it. It's a very emotional moment, and then I panic. Why did I panic? I panicked because this dream I had since I was 8 years old came true. Now I'm sitting there, I have no dream. I need a new dream. It took me 10 minutes before the epiphany occurred. I remembered back to a very cold night in January 1966. I was so excited because the Batman TV series was coming on the air that night. I had been waiting for months for this. Any comic book geek would be waiting. Oh boy, it's coming on TV. Here we go. And I was simultaneously thrilled and horrified by what I was seeing on TV. I was thrilled because Batman was on TV. It was in color. The sets were extravagant. The car was cool. But, oh my God, they were playing Batman as a joke. The whole world was laughing at my Batman. And as a comic book geek and a Batman fan, that just killed me. So that night, downstairs in our den, I made a vow. I made a vow like young Bruce Wayne once made a vow. Except Bruce Wayne made his vow over the bloody bodies of his parents murdered in the streets before him, and my parents were safe upstairs in the kitchen. I vowed that somehow, someday, I would show the world the true Batman, the dark and serious Batman, and somehow would make these three awful words disappear from the collective consciousness of the world culture: pow, zap, and wham. But again, how do you do it? How do you make the jump from here to there? Well, for me, I was coming to the end of schooling, and I wanted to get a job creatively in the movie industry. I sent out 372 resumes. 372. And this was in an era before computers. We used to use these little boxes called typewriters, which if you're ever in a museum, you can check it out. But I had to write 372 separate cover letters. And I sent them out. I got 2 job offers. One was to go to work for a major entertainment talent agency in New York, where they would start me in the mailroom for $90 US per week. And I was about to get married that summer, and I figured my wife and I would not be able to live in New York City on $90 a week. The second opportunity came from Los Angeles, a big producer out there who said, move to Los Angeles, you can be a production assistant. You'll go for coffee, you will photocopy a lot of scripts, and we will start you at $90 a week. Plan B. Always have a plan B, because you never know what twists and turns life is going to bring to you. And if you can also do it, have a plan C and a plan D. So plan B, I didn't want to, but I went to law school. I thought maybe if I learn everything I can about entertainment and communications law, maybe I could get a job on the business side of the movie business and the legal side, and then meet as many people, network like crazy as I could, learn as much as I could about how you produce and budget and distribute movies, and then when nobody was looking, sneak in the back window onto the creative side. Plan B worked. I got out of school, I got a job with United Artists, which back then was one of the major movie studios in Hollywood. I wound up in charge of the legal and business affairs and financial affairs of movies that hopefully some of you have heard about, or maybe even seen on Netflix. One was called Black Stallion, the first 3 Rocky movies, an amazing movie called Raging Bull, and for 2.5 years of my life, a movie called Apocalypse Now, which was an amazing experience. I said I'm going to do this for no more than 4 years, as if it's graduate school. But at the end of 4 years, I'm either going to be writing and producing movies, or I'll be delivering pizzas on a bicycle somewhere, but I will not be trapped and just simply be a lawyer for the rest of my life. Time passed quickly, and as we were getting close to that 4-year mark, I said, okay, this is time. I went to Saul Harrison, the man I told you called me that day from DC Comics and offered me the job. He was now the president of DC Comics. I said, Saul, I have experience now working at a movie studio. I want to raise money privately, and I want to buy the rights to Batman from DC Comics. And I want to make these dark and serious Batman movies. And Saul was very fatherly toward me, and he was so scared to hear what I was saying. He said, Michael, please don't do this. Save your money. I don't want to see you lose your money. Don't you realize since Batman went off the air on television, the brand is dead as a dodo. Nobody's interested in Batman anymore. And I said, yeah, but if we do it in a dark and serious way, nobody's ever seen a comic book movie like that. It'll almost be like we're creating a brand new kind of entertainment. He said, is there any way I can talk you out of this? I said, no. He says, all right, come on in. After a 6-month negotiation, on October 3rd, 1979, my partner, Ben Melniker, and I acquired the rights to Batman. I quit my job, and off I went to Hollywood with Batman in my back pocket. I said, this is going to be so easy. Every studio will line up at my door. How could they not? How could they not see the possibilities for sequels, animation, mobile games, toys, merchandise? This is going to be great. I was turned down by every single studio in Hollywood, virtually thrown out of a few doors. I was told one after another, this is the worst idea we ever heard. Michael, you're crazy. You can't make serious comic book movies. That's never been done. Michael, you're out of your mind. You can't make dark superheroes. Michael, you're nuts. Nobody's ever taken an old TV series and turned it into a movie. Rejection, rejection, rejection. At Columbia Pictures, I pitched my heart out for my dark and serious Batman, and at the end, the head of production looked at me, shook his head, and said, Michael, forget it. Batman will never be successful as a movie because our movie, Annie, wasn't successful. I said, are you talking about that little red-headed girl who sings the song Tomorrow? He says, yeah. I said, well, what does that have to do with Batman? He says, oh, come on, Michael. They're both out of the funny pages. They're both comic strips. That was my rejection from Columbia. From the time we acquired the rights to Batman till we were finally able to get our first movie made in 1989 was 10 years. 10 years of people telling you you're crazy, your idea stinks, your work is bad, this is no good. How do you endure 10 years of that? Well, let me tell you something, folks. It tests your mettle as a human being. You have to look deep inside your own heart and soul and ask yourself the question, is everybody right and I'm just being stubborn? Or do I really, really, really believe in what I'm doing? And every time I kept coming up with the same thing. I believe in this. I know this is right. Finally, in 1986, a young genius waltzes into our lives. A young genius by the name of Tim Burton. And it's Tim Burton who has the vision as to how to move from one medium of comic books into the medium of motion pictures and appeal to an adult audience all around the world. And you know what he told me the key is? He said, Michael, there are 2 keys to this whole thing. Number 1, from the opening frames of this movie, we must make the audiences believe in Gotham City. We have to create a world that they absolutely believe in, because if they don't believe in Gotham City, they will never believe in a guy getting dressed up as a bat, fighting a guy who looks like the Joker. Number 2, this point came when he announced he wanted Michael Keaton to play Batman. I had just spent most of my career wanting to do a dark and serious Batman. And at that time, Michael Keaton was only known as a comedian. So I said, oh my God, this is going to destroy everything I ever hoped for. I said, Tim, you can't do this. I mean, Batman is serious. We need a serious actor. He's got a square jaw. He's big and powerful. Michael Keaton doesn't quite have the physique. His hairline is receding. He's a comedian. I was apoplectic. And Tim Burton, in his wisdom, said, going from one medium to another, a square jaw does not a Batman make. He said, Michael, I could cheat the muscles by carving them into a costume. I can cheat height the way I shoot a character. But I don't know any way as a director to take one of our serious actors today, at that time it would have been people like Dennis Quaid, Kevin Costner, Harrison Ford. He goes, I don't know how to show any of these guys getting into a bat suit without getting unintentional laughs from the audience. He said, I don't know how to do that. But with Michael Keaton, he said, whom I've worked with on Beetlejuice, I know with him we can create a portrait of the person that this movie is really all about, and it's not Batman. He says, this movie has got to be about Bruce Wayne. That's the key to making it feel real. And with Michael Keaton, we can create a portrayal of Bruce Wayne who's so obsessed, so driven to the point of being psychotic, that audiences will go, yeah, that guy would get dressed up as a bat. Well, the movie opened in June of 1989. And not only was it a huge, huge box office success, but that summer of '89, you could not walk through Times Square, New York, 20 steps without seeing someone in a Batman t-shirt or a Batman cap. People were going to theaters just to watch the Batman trailer and then leaving before the main feature. It was an amazing time, and it was having an impact worldwide. I remember that summer watching the Berlin Wall come down. I was transfixed watching CNN all night long, and then in the middle of the night, I see a 10, 11-year-old boy coming through that wall into freedom for the first time in his life, and he's wearing a Batman hat. I said, wow, we are having an impact here. It was an amazing time. There was a second genius working on our first Batman movie. His name was Anton Furst, a dear friend of mine. Anton was our production designer who went on to win the Oscar that year. It's Anton who designed Gotham City, the Batmobile, and the whole look of the picture. And it was Anton who said to Tim, what's your vision for Gotham City? And Tim Burton said to him, well, I think Gotham City needs to be New York had there never been any planning and zoning. And Anton goes, whoa, okay, I get that. And he went and he researched conflicting styles of architecture and then brought in all the plans to Gotham City, and then we built 5 square city blocks of Gotham City on the back lot at Pinewood Studios outside London. Well, with the big box office success, about 2 weeks later, my phone rings. And it was one of the executives who 10 years earlier I had pitched Batman to and who had tossed me out of his office. And he says, Michael, I'm just calling to congratulate you on the success of Batman. I always said you were a visionary. Epiphany. If you don't believe them when they tell you how bad your ideas are or how lousy your work is, but then you don't believe them when they start to tell you how wonderful you are and how great all your ideas are, but just maintain that belief in yourself and your work, you'll be just fine, really fine. I'm lucky enough in my career to have worked with 3 geniuses. The third one is a man named Christopher Nolan. Just when the Batman franchise needed to be rescued once again, in walks this incredible genius who had the vision for how to do a dark and serious Batman that would make people all over the world believe in it. And he had 5 incredibly tough challenges that he had to deal with. Number 1, his first challenge, how do you get people to believe in Bruce Wayne and that he's a guy who would put on the armor and take on the Batman persona? And by casting Christian Bale and setting him on a life's journey like Lost Horizon, a journey of self-discovery, he was able to make us all believe in Bruce Wayne and his mission, and that somebody today, maybe suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, could potentially do something like this. Number 2, he had to make us believe in Gotham City. That's what Tim Burton wanted to do back in '89, but Chris came at it a completely different way. Instead of building Gotham City, he says, not today. We have to find a city and make that city, Gotham City, come to life. And he did it by making the choice to shoot that movie in Chicago. If he had chosen New York City, the second any of us saw Times Square, the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, we go, it's New York. It breaks the suspension of disbelief and you're out of it. Challenge number 3, how does he make a modern day audience believe in the Joker? We are now no longer in a world of black and white, good versus evil. Our world today is order versus chaos. It's incredibly gray. So he, along with The Performance of a Lifetime by Heath Ledger, crafted a portrayal of the Joker as a modern-day terrorist, someone who puts no value at all on human life, not man, woman, child, or his own. And maybe the biggest challenge of all, how is he going to convince you that all this technology, all these inventions, all these gimmicks are real? Well, he figured that out too. He hired Morgan Freeman to tell you they were real. And if Morgan Freeman says it's true, by God, it must be true. So I've been very fortunate in that regard. And now, this weekend, we have Justice League opening up. And Batman gets a chance to join forces with Wonder Woman and Superman and Aquaman and Flash and Cyborg. For me, it's still the 8-year-old comic book geek who still has the fire burning inside. And I go through life now, and I love what I'm doing. It doesn't feel like work. It's a lesson that I learned from my father. My dad, I told you, was a stonemason. My dad had to drop out of school at age 16 to help his family survive the Depression. My dad worked 6 days a week his entire life, a stonemason, until he was 80. My father got up before dawn every day with a big smile on his face. He couldn't wait to get to work. He was an old world craftsman. He was an artist. And when you live in a house with someone like that, how can it not influence you? How can it not make you say, I have to find my bricks and stones so that I can wake up on a rainy Monday morning and say, boy, I can't wait to get to work. So what has my life's journey taught me? My life's journey has taught me, number 1, passion. You must have passion for what you do. I swear to you, it will make all the difference in the world. No matter what you face, no matter how high-tech you and the world get, you've got to have the passion. Number 2, perseverance. The Batman franchise exists today on the basis of my bloody knuckles, because what I had to do for 10 years was knock on doors, and they kept slamming in my face. And I learned that when a door slams in your face, you only have 2 choices. You can go home and cry about it, or you can pick yourself up, dust yourself off, go back and knock again, and knock again, and knock again until your knuckles bleed. Anywhere you want to get in life, you've got to have a high threshold for frustration. A very high threshold for frustration. Number 3, I learned you've got to market yourself as well as your work. It's critically important to whatever you do. And that sometimes gets very difficult, especially as you get older. And as I was getting older, I learned I needed to learn how to do 2 things that were extremely difficult for me. Number 1, how to push myself out of my comfort zone. As AR and VR have developed, as China has become a major market, I've had to get out of my comfort zone and take some risks and be bold. Very hard to do. But in the process, we get a chance to reinvent ourselves. The same way we took Batman and took that funny pot-bellied pow-zap-wham guy and reinvented him as the Dark Knight. And as he's being reinvented again with the Justice League, and how he was reinvented again in the Lego movie and in the Batman Lego movie. We've got to be able to continually step back and reinvent ourselves. You've got to have, number 4, that spirit of entrepreneurship. Being an entrepreneur is very difficult. Things normally don't happen quick, and normally it's not easy. But, and I say this a lot to some of my students who I teach who are of the millennial generation, if you have some sort of misguided sense of entitlement, you need to give it up. The world owes you nothing. The world is not going to come to you. You know what your difference will be? If you get up off the couch and be proactive and take steps to accomplish your goals and make your dreams come true. And you know what I'm finding? I'm finding that 85% of the young people today sit on the couch. So if you're part of the 15% that get up off the couch to make it happen, your competition is now no longer 100%, it's 15%, and your chance of success just skyrocketed. In terms of where my business is going, I think it's all about global content. It's about the future in Asia, the future in China. And for you folks in particular, the whole world seems to want to embrace Korean culture. They love K-pop music. We love your soap operas. We love your webtoons. We love your manhwa. We love your TV stars. We love your soaps. And there is a great opportunity for South Korea in particular to bring its content and its thousands of years of stories, of history, of mythology, of culture to the world stage. I need your superheroes. We in America have been given the world ours for so long. And all of ours, as I said earlier, are based on Egyptian, Greek, and Roman mythology. What about the superheroes based on Korean mythology that could be modernized? I would love to see it. I think the world would love to see it. So in closing, I'd like to recite part of a poem by Robert Frost that has influenced me since I was a young student. And it goes something like this. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I chose the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So in your journey through life, dream big, take risks, never take no for an answer, and never, ever give up. Thank you all very much.